Our relationships change the course of our lives, but can they change history? I'm the Affair Archivist, and today we're going to be delving into part 2 of our series on Jennifer Jones, Robert Walker, and David O. Selznick. To watch part 1 of this series, please click the link above. On the evening of March 2nd, 1944, Bob Walker sat in his desolate apartment, bottle of whiskey in hand, and listened to the Oscars ceremony on the radio. Jennifer celebrated both her 25th birthday and her Academy Award win for The Song of Bernadette that night. Her husband wanted to be there with her on the evening of her triumph. Yet, sadly, Bob knew that come morning, their marriage would officially be over. As predicted, Jennifer filed for divorce the very next day. Clearly, she waited to prevent any scandal from tarnishing her chances at winning the coveted award. Jennifer did not request alimony or child support from Bob and did not seek sole custody of their children. She wanted Bob to see the kids as often as he wanted to. Bob ruminated. There's nothing I can do about it. Hollywood blew it. She'd have been fine if she'd never gone to Hollywood. I was powerless against a giant like Selznick. Jennifer didn't work for a year after her Oscar win because Selznick was waiting for the perfect role for her. He wanted to change her image from little girl to seductress. In this time, Jennifer missed out on being in classics such as Laura and became depressed. All she wanted to do was get back to work. Jennifer was David's mistress and kept women. He still had no intentions of leaving his wife. At a party, inebriated, he allegedly told Irene's sister, "I want to tell you something. I'm going to prove to the world that I can have my cake and eat it too." Bob's downward spiral continued at a dizzying pace. During production of The Clock, in which he starred alongside Judy Garland, Bob drunkenly called up Judy and Vincente Minnelli and said he was going to kill himself. They convinced him to come over so that they could help him. He arrived demanding more alcohol. Minnelli recalled that Bob went on a tirade against Hollywood and did not spare himself or Judy from his ire. Minnelli said at first he watered his drinks down, but then started giving him unfiltered alcohol so that he would pass out and stop ranting. Meanwhile, Irene Selznick wanted a divorce. David tried to talk her out of it, however, she was resolute. Even after he bought her a $60,000 diamond bracelet for their 15th anniversary, she refused to stay married to him. Irene wrote that David told her that, if I gave him up and she left him, he wouldn't have anyone. Then he did give her up and wanted my sympathy for the hard time Jennifer was giving him. That got us nowhere, because she didn't cause our situation. If it hadn't been her, it would have been someone else. Selznick began production of his next film, A Duel in the Sun, starring Jennifer, Gregory Peck, and Joseph Cotten. Though he sought to top the Titanic success of Gone with the Wind, the production was troubled from the start. The actors were freezing in the unforgiving climate that the movie was filmed in, and they were over budget by about $1 million. For the final climactic scene, Selznick made Jennifer crawl across a jagged cliff, even though the director, King Vidor, wanted her to wear padding for safety. David refused, feeling it would ruin the realism of the film. Jennifer's arms and stomach were covered in bloody scratches after filming. Some later said that you can hear Selznick panting behind the scenes when you watch the film. On June 20th, 1945, Jennifer appeared before a judge in LA to finalize her divorce from Bob. She cited mental cruelty as her reason for the divorce. However, when the judge asked what her husband did to her that was cruel, she said that he was very difficult and sarcastic. The judge informed her that this was not grounds for a divorce, and Jennifer claimed he forced her to go into radio work, which she didn't want to do. The judge also felt this was not cruel. Then she said he would stay away at night and not tell her where he was. Finally, the judge relented and their marriage was officially over. Though Bob tried to date other women, he could not stop talking and thinking about Jennifer. When approached by a journalist and asked about the end of his marriage, he barked, "Don't say I was carrying a torch for her," though he clearly was. On a break from filming the sequel to his hit film, See Here, Captain Hargrove, just weeks after World War II ended, Bob read the news in the paper that Irene and David Selznick were separating. After work that day, Bob left the set, got in his car, and kept driving. 4 days later, Louella Parsons published a column entitled, Bob Walker Disappears. His friends, as well as Parsons, were worried sick. Bob missed a few days of work, which was unlike him. Other papers reported that Bob had dashed off somewhere to kill himself. The following Wednesday, Bob reappeared on the set. He claimed he went to Santa Barbara to visit some friends. Bob was becoming increasingly aggravated and disillusioned with the whole Hollywood scene. After being invited to a party thrown by Louella Parsons, in which David O. Selznick was also in attendance, Bob was sick of being forced to do things he didn't want to do by the studio. He vowed to stop allowing them to control his life, which would prove to be a mistake. MGM began giving Bob minor roles that did not befit someone of his level of stardom, and they also ordered a publicity blackout on his name as retribution for his bad attitude. In August of 1946, Bob sideswiped a bakery delivery truck in his Chrysler. He fled the scene because he was, of course, drunk. The following day, he attempted to order new parts for his damaged car from a dealership in Beverly Hills. However, the cops alerted the dealers of the accident, and Bob was identified. He refused to turn himself into the police. An article ran in the paper about the incident before MGM could squash the story. Bob was less concerned about the fallout from MGM or going to jail, but more so about Jennifer's reaction and the potential embarrassment this could cause her. The judge sentenced him to 180 days in prison. However, his sentence was suspended on the grounds that Bob fulfilled certain conditions. He was required to pay fines for the damage to the truck, to stop drinking, and to drive a car that would not exceed 35 miles per hour. The judge told Bob, "You have a bright future as an actor, but you are getting some bad habits. You owe it to your public to straighten yourself out." Bob was incensed by the last remark. Jennifer, meanwhile, was sitting idle, waiting for Selznick to finish A Duel in the Sun, still under production after 2 years, and waiting for him to officially leave Irene, though he still showered his estranged wife with expensive gifts. In December of 1946, A Duel in the Sun finally premiered. It was critically panned, but a success at the box office. Selznick felt personally attacked by the criticisms and controversy surrounding the film. Bob went to see the movie, but left after the sequence in which Jennifer was essayed. He couldn't eat anything after seeing the movie, and referred to Selznick as, that bastard. Bob was still in disbelief that his wife had left him solely to gratify her blind ambition. At the start of 1947, Jennifer was in New York waiting to begin production on the film Portrait of Jenny. She begged Irene Selznick to meet with her. She waited outside a theater where Irene was producing a play for 3 hours and ambushed her to discuss David's unhappiness, which she blamed herself for. Irene recalled that Jennifer said she was bad for him. His career was over. He didn't love her, he loved me. He didn't want her sons, he wanted his. If only I would take him back, I could restore him. She grew hysterical and tried to throw herself out of the car. I just managed to pull her back. As I quieted her down, I told her David was bad for himself, and nothing she did or didn't do could change that. It was a dramatic episode, and saddening. This moment could suggest that perhaps Jennifer was not fully in love with Selznick and only went with him for the betterment of her career. Regretting this, yet feeling powerless to escape his clutches, she turned to Irene for salvation, which was not to be had. Bob was hell-bent on self-destruction, according to writer and good friend Jim Hennigan, and his prolonged mental breakdown took a violent and disturbing turn when he was cast alongside Ava Gardner in One Touch of Venus. Both she and Bob hated MGM and loved to drink, and became drinking buddies on set. Bob appeared on set many mornings looking puffy, hands shaking, due to the bender he and Ava went on the evening before. Ava, in contrast, was still fresh-faced and ready to work the morning after. Bob was attracted to Ava's detached approach to acting and stardom. She told him she didn't care if she got first billing on the picture. This was in stark contrast to Jennifer's devotion to her career, and perhaps Bob was attracted to Ava because she was the polar opposite of his ex-wife. However, when Ava became involved with another man during filming, Bob flew into a jealous rage and punched Ava in the face. When the fog of anger dissipated, Bob was horrified with himself. He had never attacked a woman before, only walls and windows and cigarette machines. After this assault, Ava gave him the cold shoulder on the set and stopped taking his calls. In fact, she even had to change her phone number because he would not stop harassing her. Rather than taking responsibility for his actions, Bob swore off dating actresses. "I'll never get mixed up with another actress as long as I live. They're able to put on too good an act. You can't trust any of them. And I'll steer clear of beautiful women, too. I'd like to meet a girl who's so unglamorous that no man would think of trying to take her away from me." Pretty insecure. Bob found the so-called unglamorous woman in Barbara Ford, daughter of the acclaimed director John Ford. Bob met the 25-year-old at a yacht party, and Barbara later recalled that she instantly fell in love with him due to his lack of ego and the interest he took in her and her passions. After less than 6 weeks together, they got married. Her parents were skeptical but allowed the marriage to happen. While the marriage was pretty much a disaster from the start, when Jennifer began calling, things quickly unraveled. She claimed the boys needed new shoes or pillowcases. Bob, of course, jumped at the chance to complete the tasks as soon as they left Jennifer's lips. Yet, he was also humiliated by being reduced to her errand boy and seemed to be aware of the games she was playing. Though she had a maid who could have completed these tasks for her, Jennifer seemed to be intentional in causing tension between the newlyweds. She was, after all, still waiting for David to get a divorce, and was perhaps resentful that Bob remarried first. Barbara stated many years later that she believed that Jennifer was just trying to hound Bob. Though her husband was detached and often nasty to her, Barbara believed this to be a normal adjustment period for the marriage. However, within a month of the vows, Bob locked himself in his room for 4 days and refused to come out. When he eventually emerged, he became physically abusive towards Barbara, who struggled to call her father for help. Bob said he couldn't stand her. The Fords picked up their daughter and brought her home. The following day, Bob angrily called them and told them to take her back where you got her. Hennigan recalled that Bob was taking out his frustrations on his bride because she wasn't Jennifer, punishing her because she wasn't Jennifer. Jennifer Jones and David O. Selznick were only faring slightly better. His divorce from Irene was underway. His financial problems were mounting. David loaned Jennifer out to Columbia Pictures so he could earn some money to put towards a $12 million debt the studio was in. After her film with Columbia wrapped, Jennifer took the boys to Europe. She enrolled them in school in Switzerland, while she allegedly sought the therapeutic services of Carl Jung. She was unable to get an appointment with Jung, so she spent the day shopping in Paris and bought a bunch of Dior gowns. Back in America, Selznick had a meltdown due to a practical joke played upon him by Daniel O'Shea and Joseph Cotton. The actors made a copy of a portrait Selznick owned of Jennifer, a prop from a film and his prized possessions, and had a mustache drawn on Jennifer's face. They swapped the original portrait, which hung in Selznick's dining room, with the defaced copy before a dinner party Selznick held at his home. When the guests arrived and Selznick saw it, he had a conniption, not realizing the portrait was a copy. Even after Cotton assured him that they had done nothing to the original, David would not calm down and screamed, "It's not funny," repeatedly. Bob's career, like his short-lived marriage, was also in shambles. His insolence had caused much of the roles he would have been perfect for to go to Van Johnson or Peter Lawford, and he didn't work for an extended period. However, his popularity remained intact, and MGM held on to his contract. Bob, his own worst enemy, had another run-in with the police after he allowed his friend to drive his car drunk. He threatened the officers and was booked on drunk and disorderly behavior. When asked to admit that he was intoxicated, Bob responded, "Why, I've been drunk for 25 years. Bob was photographed trying to punch the police. his face twisted in rage. According to Luella Parsons, Jennifer was extremely humiliated by this event and met with Bob to beg him to get his behavior under control for the sake of their sons. After the jailhouse photos became public, Bob locked himself away in his apartment, horrified about the damage and humiliation he had brought on his sons and Jennifer. His career was also hanging on by a thread, but luckily for him, he had some allies at MGM. Head of production Dor Sherry placed Bob's contract on the desk. He gave Bob an ultimatum. He could tear up the contract, never act again, and continue on the path of self-destruction. Or he could agree to undergo psychiatric treatment for his depression and rage, with all expenses paid by the studio at the Menninger Clinic in Topeka, Kansas. Bob agreed to go and disappeared from Hollywood for several months. Even his best friend Jim Hennigan couldn't get a hold of him. The doctors believed Bob would need at least a year of treatment, maybe even 2. One day, Bob somehow convinced the orderlies at the hospital to allow him to go into town to get some books and records. However, he met up with a random guy and 2 young girls and ended up at, of course, a bar. The group got into a fight with the cab driver, whom they claim overcharged them. The melee that ensued resulted in Bob putting his fist through a plate glass bulletin board at the police station. Bob was rushed to the hospital, covered in blood. He told Hedda Hopper, "I was more determined than ever to get away, because I was sure the clinic had driven me to my display of violence." Bob almost left the facility after the incident. However, one of the doctors simply sat with him and listened to him rant, and he decided to stay. This doctor treated him in therapy for 6 days a week, in which Bob explored his feelings of abandonment and feeling unwanted that stemmed from his loveless childhood. Bob later said, "Everybody has problems, but I couldn't live with mine. I wasn't an alcoholic, but I was on the way to being one. The way I reacted to reality, such as my divorce from Jennifer, reflected my immaturity. I played it like everybody should pity me. I unconsciously was trying to get attention and pity, which was not realistic and mature. Being psychoanalyzed was like getting rid of a ton of bricks I'd been carrying around all my life." Around this time, Jennifer was cast to play Madame Bovary for MGM. She was nervous about the role, believing it to be pushing the limits of her acting abilities because of the character's extreme departure from her own personality. Some noted the irony of the statement, giving Madame Bovary is about a woman who abandons her husband and children in pursuit of men with higher status, leading to catastrophe for all involved. Jennifer had a breakdown on the set of the film when the actress playing her daughter refused to embrace her in a scene. She cried, "No one likes me. She thinks I'm terrible. Nobody likes me." Her affair with Selznick had put her in a bad position. The press didn't like her. David's friends blamed her for his downfall. Irene Selznick's circle, of course, gave Jennifer the cold shoulder, and many felt she was a nasty woman for what she did to Bob. This isolation most likely resulted in a very lonely, isolating existence for Jennifer, who had only her career, sons, and Selznick to turn to. After Selznick's divorce was finalized in 1947, Luella Parsons asked Jennifer about marriage plans. "I don't know, Luella. I don't know," she replied. Bob, after making much progress at the psychiatric hospital, was released in May of 1948. Dor Sherry cast him in a romantic comedy, Please Believe Me, alongside Deborah Carr. Jennifer offered to allow Bob to move into her home to be with their sons while she was in Europe. Bob declined, aware that being surrounded by her possessions would trigger him. Bob was on the wagon and professional on the set of his new film. He also agreed to be interviewed by Hedda Hopper. He talked about how much psychoanalysis helped him. David and Jennifer married on July 13, 1948, on a yacht outside the coast of Portofino. Bob was hounded for a statement regarding his ex-wife's remarriage. "I wish her all the happiness she deserves. She is first and foremost the mother of my sons." By 1950, Bob's life and career was on an upward trajectory. Alfred Hitchcock wanted to cast Bob in his next film, Strangers on a Train, against type. Bob was excited and flattered that Hitchcock had hand-selected him for such a sumptuous part, and was excited about becoming a serious actor. Bob was a professional on set, and everyone enjoyed his company. It seemed that his mental health was in better condition, his drinking problem was under control, and his obsession with Jennifer had dissipated. He began dating Kay Scott Neary, an aspiring writer and composer. Though he hoped for an Oscar nomination, Bob was snubbed, though his performance remains iconic and groundbreaking to this day. Although it may have seemed like things were improving for Bob, tragically, he would be dead within a year. Around this time, Jennifer was in a career slump, having not worked for a few years, and in her early 30s, she feared her career was over. She volunteered at military hospitals in Japan and Korea, and resumed traveling around Europe with Selznick. When she finally did have a role again, she discovered she was pregnant. She did not want to drop out, yet the strain of the production would unfortunately result in a miscarriage. August 28, 1951, was chilly and rainy in Beverly Hills. Bob Walker had the day off of work, and his sons were not with him. He mainly rested at home and, according to most reports, was not drinking. Around 6 p.m., his housekeeper put in a frantic call to his psychiatrist. Bob was having a meltdown, and she could not get him to relax. The doctor rushed to Bob's house. Hennigan was in the neighborhood and stopped by. He said Bob was acting normal and playing cards with the housekeeper when he arrived. According to Hennigan's account, the doctors arrived and insisted Bob needed an injection of a sedative. Bob laughed and said he was fine. He refused and ran out of the house at one point. Jim asked the doctors if it was really necessary, and they said yes, so he convinced Bob to come back inside. As they injected him, Bob joked that the doctors couldn't find a vein. However, they did, and he passed out. The psychiatrist immediately noticed something was wrong. Bob turned blue and stopped breathing. The doctors tried to revive him, but were unsuccessful. Around 10 p.m., the doctors pronounced Bob Walker dead. The doctors were shaken with what had happened, having administered a non-lethal dose of the sedative. They told police that Bob told them he felt terrible, that he needed help quickly. They were unsure if Bob had been drinking or not. After learning of Bob's death, Jennifer and Selznick immediately booked passage home from Europe to be with Jennifer's sons. Neither of them ever made a public statement pertaining to Bob's untimely death. Though his demise was unexpected, no autopsy was performed, and the cause of death was recorded as died of natural causes after receiving a dose of sodium amytal and had been a victim of schizophrenia of an undiagnosed nature. Bob was buried in Salt Lake City. He was 32 years old. At the time of his death, Bob was seeing a new woman, who always wondered what might have happened had he not died. Was he finally getting over Jennifer and defeating his demons? Unfortunately, we missed out on the talents of Bob Walker, which were just starting to blossom. After Bob's death, Jennifer and the boys returned to Europe, where much of Selznick business was taking place. She enrolled them in school in Switzerland. Jennifer's career picked up a bit. She was cast in the lead in a co-production between Vittorio De Sica and Selznick, Terminal Station. Montgomery Clift once observed that though Jennifer loved Selznick, she was still haunted by Bob's death, and that both she and David were in deep analysis. Jennifer gave Monty a gift after production of their film completed, a leather bag which turned out to have a faulty clasp. Monty told friends, "Jennifer Jones gave this to me. It's beautiful, but it doesn't quite work. How like Jennifer?" The Selznicks had a daughter together, Mary Jennifer, in 1954. Selznick doted on the girl to distract him from his floundering career. David never reclaimed his former Gone with the Wind glory. In fact, his last few films were commercial and critical failures. In particular, his production of A Farewell to Arms, starring Jennifer and Rock Hudson, was a painful box office bomb. By the late 1950s, David said, "Maybe my kind of picture is out of style. Maybe I am an anachronism." After surviving 4 heart attacks, David succumbed to a fifth on June 23, 1965, at the age of 63. In the aftermath of her husband's death, Jennifer struggled to get back to work and isolated herself. Roles of substance were no longer being curated for her from Hollywood's most powerful producer, and unfortunately, as a middle-aged actress, her options were slim. After the death of a close friend in 1967, she attempted to end her life by taking an overdose of Seconal and alcohol. Her stomach was pumped, and she was in a coma for 6 hours before regaining consciousness. Jennifer found meaning in charity work and raising her daughter. All of her children pursued careers in Hollywood, to varying degrees of success. She remarried industrialist and multimillionaire Norton Simon in 1971 after a very short courtship. Yet another tragedy would befall Jennifer when in May of 1976, her daughter jumped off of a building in Los Angeles and ended her life. She was only 21 years old. Jennifer was devastated. Mary had gone through mental health treatments, and she thought her mental state was improving. Jennifer would end her acting career on a high note, with a role in The Towering Inferno. She got the part after Olivia de Havilland turned it down. It would be her final appearance in film. After retiring from acting, Jennifer spent most of her time working with her charities, especially the Jennifer Jones Simon Foundation for Mental Health and Education, which she founded in the aftermath of her daughter's death. She and her husband were also avid art collectors. Despite this, she was not fully satisfied with her life. Jennifer was a born actress and yearned to return to the art form she loved so much and had sacrificed so much for. However, she struggled to stage a comeback. She purchased the rights to a story called Terms of Endearment, but inexplicably sold them to Paramount, clearing the way for Shirley MacLaine to win an Oscar. She never made her comeback and stayed out of the public eye for the remainder of her life, never granting interviews. Jennifer Jones died in late 2009 at the age of 90. In the aftermath of Bob's death, Jennifer would shoulder much of the blame for her former husband's tragic passing, though it was clear that Bob's issues were deeper and predated the breakup of their marriage. Hennigan, in an article published shortly after Bob's death, concluded, "The breakup of his marriage may have been the trigger that transformed him from a borderline neurotic to a man needing psychiatric help, but if it hadn't been that, it surely would have been something else." Though her motives for leaving her marriage have also been questioned for decades, it's not as though Jennifer left Bob and skipped off into the sunset with Selznick. Her second marriage was also dysfunctional, marred by David's physical and mental health issues. Her career never quite reached its early peak again, and she tragically lost her daughter. She did not grant interviews or court any publicity for nearly 20 years leading up to her death, perhaps because she did not want to rehash painful memories from her past. It could be argued that Jennifer's former life haunted her. After she attempted to end her own life in 1967, she checked into a motel to recover. She didn't check in as Jennifer Jones, though. Understandable, given her fame. She didn't check in under her birth name, Phyllis Isley, either. She checked in under Phyllis Walker, her name for the shortest, and perhaps simplest, period of her life. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe, and join me next time as we dissect another affair from history.